Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here, got another Master Duel video for you. So coming at you with a tier list, which I actually haven't done in a while. Lately we've been doing the Meta Watch series instead, and don't worry, I do still have plans to continue that, but as I was going to work on the next one, I realized that the upper part of the meta, for the most part, is going to be remaining mostly the same. It would basically just be the same as the last Meta Watch video, and then me just slotting in Radiant Typhoon as well. So rather than doing that and just retracing a lot of our old information we've already talked about, I'm going to go back to a tier list format just for this video, just so we can talk about exactly which decks are better than others specifically, because I think there's a lot to explore there. So don't worry, Meta Watch isn't going anywhere, but if you do like this tier list format, definitely let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to incorporate that more in addition to stuff like Meta Watch. So here we have 20 different decks, and I have split some of them up by variants, and just because I have these 20 decks here doesn't mean they're like the only 20 viable decks in the meta. There are a lot of rogue decks out there that could very easily top or even win a tournament or get high up in rating duels with a more dedicated pilot, so there's a lot out there that's competitively viable. We're also going to be talking about a lot of the more recent decks as well, so just because some of these decks are on here doesn't mean they're necessarily better than older ones. They've just had like recent updates or been introduced, and I want to make sure that we cover them. So, alright, now that we've got all that out of the way, let's go ahead and just start ranking some decks here. Starting up top with Assault Mode Activate. This is a lot of what I meant when I said we're going to be talking about some decks here that are getting new support, but just because they're on here doesn't mean they're better than other decks, right? Like, Assault Mode Activate is a pretty firmly rogue deck, and there are even decks that are tier 3 that I don't have necessarily on this list. Like, Branded is a really good example. Branded hasn't had its new support come out yet, so I don't really feel like there's a ton to talk about, but I feel like it's at least a tier 3 deck still, even though we're going to be covering some rogue decks here, like the new Assault Mode stuff. Now, the new Assault Mode cards you could play in a dedicated Assault Mode deck, or you could use the Synchro, the like Nightwing Sorcerer, alongside the Crimson Blader, which searches Assault Mode cards in more of a 60-card pile deck. I think either way, both those strategies are going to be pretty decidedly rogue, though. As cool as I think, you know, Synchro-based pile decks are, I don't think that getting to your Side Reflector and other engine cards more often solves a lot of the problems, right? That they're still really weak to hand traps, that the boards they set up, while flashy, really aren't that much more impressive than, you know, what other decks can do. White Forest, I think, is still really, really solid in this meta. Definitely still a tier 2 deck, and the new Dark Magician support really has done wonders for it. The Dark Magician Destruction, being able to turn Diabellstar into that, grab the Gaze of Timaeus, use your Deception of Sinful Spoils to tribute Dark Magician Destruction, pivot into Azamina, while being able to add Dragoon to your board. Very, very impactful addition to the engine, which has kept White Forest very relevant in this meta. Very good deck, yeah, I like it a lot too. Orcust. So Orcust, is one of those decks that I haven't really split up the different variants of. Like Yummy, you're going to see like 3 different Yummy decks here, and Brandon's got a couple of different variants as well. Orcust has a couple of different ways you can play it, whether it's pure, you know, or with the K9 engine. Could be just the Izuna, could be a more dedicated K9 engine, could be with Mitsurugi as well. I think those are all like close enough to the same power level that I'm comfortable grouping them all together. And this is a deck where I'm not sure whether to put it at the top of tier 3 or like the bottom of tier 2. I think I'll put it towards the top of tier 3 right now. Although I will say, you know, in a lot of the recent like Deckmaster Cups and Challenger Cups, I've been looking at a lot of the top, you know, cut deck lists for those. I've actually been seeing a lot of Orcust there lately. I'm gonna, you know what, I'll bump this up to the bottom of tier 2. I think Orcust is still a very respectable deck to play in the current meta. You might not see it nearly as much as when the, you know, Galatea I and the Link 4 Gear Suit came out, but it is still a really, really good deck. I think Lunalight is also still a really good deck. Tier 2 for sure. You know, in that best of 1 meta, as I've always said, if you can stick the one Liger Dancer, that is going to be still really impactful. But I think where Lunalight kind of falters compared to other, you know, upper meta decks is that it's a little bit weaker to hand traps, and more particularly, if you can keep Lunalight off their polymerization, then it's really hard for them to make any amount of plays, let alone get into the Liger Dancer. So it's kind of one of those decks where if it can do its thing, then it feels really unstoppable. But once you know what they're doing, it's not super hard to stop them either. Still a really good deck though, for sure. Odon. You know what? Okay, I think I am going to put Orcust towards the top of tier 3, and then I'll put Odon... I might even put it a little bit above White Forest, because I think Odon is a pretty respectable deck. It's, in a lot of ways, it's the new Labyrinth, as in, it's going to be the back row based deck that you're going to see a lot in this meta. That's not necessarily Stun, although Stun we haven't really seen a lot lately either. I think that's mostly due to how weak Stun is with all the floodgates being hit, and then how strong meta decks have become as opposed to Stun, which doesn't get many new tools. Not that it needs it. Anyway, we're talking about Odon, which I think is a really solid tier 2 deck. And it's one of those decks that feels almost unbeatable when you go second against it. But of course, being a back row deck, it will naturally tend to be a lot weaker or win going second. Okay, Sky Striker I think is pretty comfortably a tier 3 deck. Although I will say, it's worth noting that Radiant Typhoon Vision is a really good piece of support for Sky Striker. Sky Striker always wants to be adding more cards to hand, so the ability to draw 2 and then discard any quick play spell not only gets you to more of your engine, but also loads your graveyard up with spells, another thing Sky Striker of course really wants to do. Yeah, not really much else to say there. Sky Striker is still really, really solid. I haven't seen it put up too many tournament results lately, but it's still a pretty respectable force in the current meta. Okay, Radiant Typhoon. This is interesting. So this is among the decks from the new selection pack, definitely the best one for sure. I'm thinking about where exactly I want to put it. I think it's about around the same level as Lunalight. I think that's not too unfair to say. Maybe even between Lunalight and Odon, but I'll put it a little bit above for now. Now, don't get me wrong, Radiant Typhoon is really, really good, but I think it does lack a little bit of the oomph that a lot of the tier 1 decks and even some other tier 2 decks are going to have over it. Now, of course, when the pack first released, the comment that I got inundated with was, but Harpy's Featherstorm. This deck is going to be tier 1 because Harpy's Featherstorm is legal. But here's the thing, right? If you were to go to Road to the King or any resource that lets you see decks that are doing well in the OCG, and you look at Radiant Typhoon lists, you're not really seeing any Featherstorm there, despite the fact that it's also at 3 in the OCG. And sure enough, in this first week or so that Radiant Typhoon has been legal, I've seen a couple of lists doing well that are on the Featherstorm, but the vast majority of them are not. And it's pretty simple to explain, honestly. Not only is the Featherstorm not as good in a best of 1 format, but even beyond that, you can't really realistically use it on turn 1. I've seen people talk about oh, you could link into a Harpy Channeler, and then all of a sudden it's live on turn 1, and it's okay, but you're still using so many resources to do that, and this also just all assumes that you're actually drawing the Featherstorm. It's a card you have to draw. So I don't think Featherstorm being legal super impacts the power level of Radiant Typhoon, but I think even in spite of that, Radiant Typhoon is still a really solid tier 2 deck in this meta. I could see this falling off a little bit. Of course it's being played a lot right now because of new deck hype. It just came out. I think realistically it's probably still somewhere in this neighborhood, but I think I will put Lunalight a little bit above it. Just because I think in best of 1, Lunalight actually does tend to play a little bit better. Lunalight's a little bit stronger going second, where that's where I think Radiant Typhoon can really suffer. Alright. I have Tristaros here to represent K9 Crystron, since pure Crystron really isn't as much of a thing anymore. But K9 Crystron I have not seen a lot of. Even after release, it was a lot more K9 Vanquish Soul. So it's kind of hard for me to place this deck. Excuse me, sorry about that. I'm not sure if I want to put it towards the top of tier 3. Or the bottom of tier 2. I think I have to put it in tier 3. And I almost want to put Orcust above it even. Because I feel like I've seen a lot more Orcust around than I have K9 Crystron. But I'll leave it like this. I think that's fine. They're pretty much about equal power level decks anyway. Yeah, I think the thing with K9 Crystron is that the K9 Vanquish Soul just plays so much better going second, has so many more options, and obviously they're decks that are trying to do two different things, but as far as like within the K9 engine, you know, the Crystron variant is still very much a turn 1 base combo deck that, yeah, has like Izuna as an extra turn 0/hand trap type effect, but doesn't have the same turn 0 impact as, you know, the Vanquish Soul cards add, for example. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at the top of tier 3. I think that's fine. Okay. Goki got recent support, but is definitely going to be in Rogue tier still. Not really a ton to say about it. I'm not very well experienced in Goki. I haven't seen it on ladder really at all. And from what I could tell in all my research, it doesn't seem like in the TCG or OCG, the new support gave any competitive impact to it, as I could not find any amount of tournament tops really beyond like a local level where it actually done well. I think Goki is still going to have a lot of the same weaknesses from what I could tell just looking at the cards, that it's a big warrior-based combo deck, but the end board is like, you could just play Warrior Link, is basically the argument here, right? Like, you could play more like Infernoble or even generic-based Warrior Link deck and end on a stronger board than like pure Goki is putting up. At least from what I can tell. I could be ignorant of that. Goki is definitely the deck on here that I am the least familiar with. Alright, Pure Mitsurugi. Still really, really good in this metagame. I'll put it in tier 2. Maybe even a little bit above Lunalight. Because Mitsurugi, even though Habakiri's been semi-limited, that's just a very minor consistency hit. I guess making it more inconsistent. And at the end of the day, it's still doing all the same thing it was doing very, very efficiently. And really the biggest strength of a more pure Mitsurugi deck, and Mitsurugi as an engine in general, honestly, is the variety of different things you can do with it in terms of the off engine you can play, in terms of your extra deck options, what your end boards look like. We're going to talk about Risal with Mitsurugi here separately later, because I think that is worth talking about separately. But I think even if you don't choose to include a small Risal engine, pure Mitsurugi is still a very, very good deck in the meta. Okay, Pure Yummy. So I have Yummy split into 3 different variants here, and I have to be totally honest, I think that Pure Yummy in particular is actually a tier 2 deck. As much as I love Yummy, here's the thing, the Pure variant, it's just so weak to disruption, right? You're so much more reliant on that first Yummy body sticking, because really what all the other Yummy variants kind of have going for them over Pure is that you have other engines that can not only do their own plays, but even also set up a Yummy board on top of that. So it kind of makes the argument for Pure Yummy a lot harder to make. Now, I am still going to put it really high in tier 2 because I think this deck is still really, really good, even when played pure. And the big advantage to playing Pure Yummy is that you have more room for off engine. So you can afford to play, like, honestly, up to 20 hand traps in a Pure Yummy deck is not completely unrealistic. But again, you're going to be a lot more susceptible to disruption, like Izuna into Valen / Nosh Knight, you know, stealing your initial body or turning it face down. You know, you're relying on that normal summon so much more. But that said, still really good deck, and like I said, you can play a ton of hand traps, which can make up for that and makes going second better than, you know, some other Yummy variants. Okay, Synchron. Synchron is actually worth noting because within the Assault mode support, we got Assault Sonic Warrior, which actually also supports the new Junk Warrior stuff, which in turn supports Synchron. That said, I don't think it makes Synchron significantly better than it was. I'm going to put it in the Rogue tier. And as much as I do love Synchron and Synchro Summoning, yeah, I still think the deck is a little bit on the weak side. Like, it's got 1-card combos now with some insulation thanks to Junk Signal, which is nice, but at the end of the day, it's still more susceptible to hand traps than a lot of these other meta decks. And kind of similar to, you know, the problem with these Assault mode pile decks that are doing these big, long combo lines, the board that Synchron puts up for the effort that you go through to make it really isn't that much stronger than like a lot of other meta decks and boards. But still not a terrible deck. Doomsy, another new deck from the selection pack that recently came out. I'm going to put in Rogue tier for now with a pretty big asterisk on it because, you know, the Medius the Pure lore deck is going to get, all of them, the Archmage, Doomsy, and the other upcoming ones, are going to get a lot stronger when Power Patron becomes its own dedicated archetype, giving these Pendulum monsters and other support cards to all the different lore archetypes based around Medius the Pure, like Doomsy. And when those cards come out, like right now in the OCG, Doomsy is definitely a top 10 deck. So if you pulled some of the Doomsy URs, even if you're not interested in playing the deck right now, it might be worth holding on to them for a future release. But even for the time being, I think Doomsy is still a really solid rogue deck. I've played against it a couple of times, and when it gets its engine going, it's scary. It's got the ability to quick effect summon Xyz monsters, so it can set up OTKs that way. It's got equip spells that make their stuff untargetable. It's got a lot going for it. Alright, Draco Tail. Pure Draco Tail in particular is going to be the first deck we put up here at tier 1. And branded Draco Tail, I'm going to put, I don't know. See, there are so many arguments both for and against branded Draco Tail being better than pure. But I have been seeing a lot of branded Draco Tail around lately in you know, tournament top cuts, and particularly I have seen a number of builds, not the majority, but a number of branded Draco Tail builds utilizing the Perform Pal 5 Rainbow Magician as a sort of floodgate effect, which is a pretty powerful tool. So I'll put branded Draco Tail slightly above pure, but of course the drawback of playing branded Draco Tail is that you have to play more bricky cards, like the level 2 Draco Tail monster whose name I can't remember, of course Albaz itself, but you do have a lot more options, particularly in the extra deck, so pros and cons. But I think the two Draco Tail variants, both pure and branded, are about equal power level at tier 1. Alright, Mitsurugi Yummy I'll put in tier 1. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna swap the... No. You know what? I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this down here, but I think I'll put pure Mitsurugi above it. See, the thing about Mitsurugi Yummy is that it's a little bit more susceptible to hand traps than something like pure Yummy, but it's putting up a lot stronger of an end board. But at the end of the day, Yummy variants all kind of have this issue where their normal summon super matters, and if the normal summon gets countered, it becomes a lot more difficult to play. Also, if you're playing a Yummy variant with another dedicated engine, like, you know, this is also true of like Snake Eye Yummy as well, but with Mitsurugi Yummy 2, if you only open Yummy cards, your end board is often going to be weaker than even a pure Yummy deck, because you're cutting a lot of the Yummy engine to make room for the Mitsurugi stuff. So if you don't open the Mitsurugi stuff, now you have fewer Yummy options to work with, right? Like Acro-Qui is a big example. Pure almost always plays Acro-Qui, but Mitsurugi Yummy often doesn't have room for it. So in turn, that's just one example of how your end board is going to be weaker a lot of the time, right? But I do think Mitsurugi Yummy still has a little bit of an edge over Pure for having more options and putting up a stronger end board. Now, Sulfacord Yummy, I think, is absolutely a tier 1 deck. And really what the Sulfacord engine does is it kind of highlights what makes Yummy already really good and gives it more options. I think Sulfacord Yummy plays a lot closer to pure Yummy than a lot of people might think. In particular, what Sulfacord adds is just more ways that don't take your normal summon to pivot into a Yummy board. It gives you the option to play Herald of Orange Light since you're on so many fairy monsters, which is a really, really strong hand trap that pure Yummy and other variants don't get to play. And Time Maiden, which is a fairy monster that's level 1 that can special summon itself from your hand and does not activate in hand to do so. So that's another extender for Yummy that doesn't require your normal summon. And in turn, a deck like Sulfacord Yummy often doesn't even use its normal summon, as opposed to, you know, pure Yummy, which lives and dies by it. That's why I think I've been seeing so much more Sulfacord Yummy doing well in tournaments and in rating duels and stuff, and why I'm putting it at tier 1 as opposed to the other Yummy variants, which I'm putting more towards the top of tier 2. I think Sulfacord Yummy really is the way to go right now. K9 Vanquish Soul. I have that represented by a Holly Sue because, again, we're not releasing pure Vanquish Soul. So K9 Vanquish Soul, I'm going to put in tier 1, but I'm actually going to put it a little bit below Draco Tail, between Sulfacord Yummy. Here's the thing. All these tier 1 decks, I think they're pretty much all about equal power level, but I have seen more results for Draco Tail so far. Lately, I've been seeing it placed higher, at least in tournaments and rating duels, than I have Vanquish Soul K9. Despite having relatively recently come out, Vanquish Soul K9's kind of falling off. Not necessarily as in it's falling off overall as a deck. It's still tier 1 and one of the best decks in the meta, but I don't think it's like clearly the best deck in the meta. It does suffer from being bricky a lot of the time. You know, those semi-limits, while individually don't seem too impactful, added all together have created quite a noticeable consistency hit for K9 Vanquish Soul. So I'll put it in tier 1, but a little bit below the Draco Tail variants. But again, it's worth stressing that all of these decks I have here in tier 1 are pretty much almost exactly as strong as each other. There's not that much difference at all. Alright, Risal Mitsurugi, I'm going to put at the top of tier 2. I'm actually a little tempted to put this in tier 1, but I'll leave it here for the time being at the top of tier 2. Now, I think it is worth talking about the Mitsurugi decks that are mostly played the same as pure, but with a small Risal engine added. I think that is worth talking about over pure Mitsurugi. In fact, now that I think about it some more, I think I'm going to bump pure Mitsurugi down below the Yummy decks. Because I think there is that noticeable of a gap between the two different ways to play Mitsurugi. Basically, by adding a very minimal amount of Risal cards to your deck, you're actually able to make your deck so much stronger, because even if you're only playing like 3-4 Risal monsters in your main deck, you can still use 2 of your level 4 Mitsurugi cards to make duo drive and very consistently be able to go into them. And even if Cross is banned, Detonator is still a very, very powerful card. And even if not Detonator, you have so many options for Rank Force to be able to set up. You know, like Dugaris, and especially when going second, you know, this can matter a lot. Being able to make like the Utopic Ray Lancer to help OTK, Dugaris to help OTK, just adds a lot of options for a very minimal deck requirement. Again, I think that the pure Mitsurugi decks that are opting to play a small Risal engine, that's super worth noting. And I've even seen some builds doing well where the Risal engine is not that small. They'll be on like a full playset of Ice Risal, as well as the Node, in addition to Sword and X, as opposed to some builds are just playing like 1 Sword, 1 X, 1 Ice. Either way though, I think that this actually does border on a tier 1 deck. Make no mistake, Cross may be banned, but Risal Mitsurugi is still really good. And finally, Malice. I'm going to put Malice in tier 3, a little bit above Sky Striker, which is, I think, is about where I've put it, you know, the last couple of times. Yeah, I think it's still a decent deck, but has obviously really noticed all of the consistency hits that it's taken, with all of its main deck monsters besides March Hare being at 1, Gold Sark, Allure, the Field Spell all being at 1. Yeah, it's definitely all made a huge difference. One thing I will point out here, that I mentioned a couple of times on the channel, is that Malice was the problem, and that Splash Mage didn't need to be hit otherwise. And looking at the current meta, and even cards to come out in the future, I think that has maintained... Yeah, I maintain that stance, honestly. I don't think Splash Mage needs to be banned. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Splash Mage is only as good as the best Cyber Stack is. And right now, the best Cyber Stack is Malice, and how often are you seeing that around, right? Splash Mage isn't doing anything more impactful than that. So I don't think the card needs to be banned if there's no like super ridiculous Cyber Stacks going around. And even then, you would always make the argument, right, that whatever Cyber Stack is best is obviously having a lot more impact than Splash Mage individually is. It's like, I don't know. I just don't understand why ritual decks can have a generic tool like pre-prep. That's totally fine, you know. But synchro decks upcoming have the Phydraulius Harmonia as a generic tool. But Cybers, not even Link summoning in general, but even more specific down to a specific type Cybers, that having an extender tool is just too much for people. I don't know. I think it comes down to a lot of the time, you know, it's TCG players saying, oh, this card is banned in our format, it should be banned in all formats, but obviously not true. Anyway, yeah, Malice is still totally fine in this meta with all of its consistency hits. Alright, we'll get a tier list here. I'm pretty comfortable with where I've placed everything. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Always look forward to hearing from you. But I think for the time being, that's going to go ahead and do it. Thank you, as always, for watching. Let's go ahead now and move on to our outro so we can thank our YouTube members and Patreon subscribers. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.